This is a Spyderco Police 3 clone comparison video. When I do these videos, I just basically want to point out some of the things you can do to try to figure out whether you got a Chinese knockoff or not and got cheated on eBay, which is what this is really about, if you buy knives on eBay. But you can buy knives from some retailers, some online shops that have fairly well-known names, and believe it or not, get a cloned knife. So a Chinese knockoff. So here's two Police 3s. One is real and one is not real. One is a Chinese-made knife. So I'm going to go over them real quick here. This one right here on the right is the Chinese knife in the Chinese box, and the one on the left is the real Spyderco Police 3 and the box. So let me just go over the boxes real quick, and then we'll go over the knives. I don't put much stock in box analysis because I'm going to show you something right here. This is the real box, and right off the bat it's got a flaw on here that you would think would say this is a knockoff, but I've had a couple of real boxes that were like this. You can see the imprint of the gold spider. It's the red, black, and the swoosh, the gray swoosh, shows through. It wasn't printed very well. I mean, it looks like hell. And but this is the real box and the real knife, and I've had another one like this too, a couple of them. So you can't go by the color of the red. Sometimes and as you can maybe see or appreciate here, they're real close. Sometimes there's a little more orange on the Chinese boxes. Sometimes they get these swooshes messed up, but the swoosh on here looks really good. Some people analyze the corners. They try to look at how the text is aligned. They look at the weight of the font. Sometimes they say, and the real one is on the top, they say the heavier font is the Chinese font. Well, you can see right here, it's a heavier imprint on the genuine box. This all boils down to one thing. All these boxes, whether they're real or whether they're Chinese, are printed in China, even the Spyderco boxes. So you can't look at the alignment, you can't, that's like reading tea leaves. So I would say give up looking at the boxes. A lot of people look at the printing, the fonts on these things. These are just, printer tabs off of a laser printer. So, the fact that some of them, like they go and they look at the space between the Arabic numbers and the barcode. And the fact there is a space, which this is the clone, they'll say that's a clone. But I've seen the real ones have the space and the real ones not have the space. You can see here is a real one, it does not have the space. These two numbers, G, M, and KL, have to do with the date code, ignore that. But just these things are set up on a printer. They look at the weight of this and the weight, just give up on that. Because the factory boxes can have all kinds of play and all kinds of problems in that. About the only thing that I've usually latched onto is usually these, if this is clean bubble wrap like this is, it doesn't look like it's been sitting in the back of a machine shop for 3 years gathering dust and dirt and metal fragments. That's usually a good sign, but not all Spyderco knives come in this. Some of them come in flat, clear. Sometimes the clear wrap is real thin and crinkly. Sometimes it's not. You can't really go by this either. I used to say that you could go by, I'm going to pull this out. A lot of times this education thing, which the real one didn't have it in here or I've misplaced it, this thing is for an Enduro or something. It's not even the right thing. It's heavy glossy paper. You can't go by this. Maybe if it's got a typo, you could go by it. I don't know. A lot of times it's because the foam doesn't fit, but this is one of the few clones I ran across that the clone foam does not fit. Usually it always fits, or it's actually a little bit oversized. So you can see both of these have got the same space around them, so you'd say, this is the first time I've really had a clone that the foam didn't fit, which is usually a sign of a real knife that the foam doesn't fit. Only thing on this, but this one, they're both the same. The foam is cut too small, and that's usually a sign of a factory knife. So you pull it out. About the only thing I can say on these is you can usually use cheap foam in the Chinese ones. This is dense. You can't see through it. It feels like thick foam. This Chinese foam, they usually try to really cut a corner on here, which makes sense, I guess, because it's just a piece of foam that a lot of people may not keep or may throw away. You can see, you can read through this thing. So usually the Chinese foam is very thin like this. That's a dead giveaway. I've never seen a factory knife with this cheap a foam in it. You can see here's the factory foam. It is very dense. It feels dense. It's a dense foam. they're trying to cushion their knife and keep it from, have it presented well. So that's the only giveaway on this particular knife set that I can say, a particular box set on these knives that kind of gives this away as a Chinese clone. Right there. I look at the foam. I usually look at how the foam's fitted, but this is one of the few boxes that the foam doesn't fit, and that means usually it's a factory knife, but since this foam doesn't fit and we know it's a clone, we can throw that out. So I say, so then the moral of the story is, don't pay a lot of attention to the boxes unless you see something that jumps out at you like the foam. Here's the two knives. This is the real one, and this is the clone. So, I'm getting more on here. I don't know if you can, that's probably zebras, I think. So, one of the things that jumps out at you when you pick the knives up is this clone. Police should feel svelte in your hands. It should feel thin and kind of almost delicate for as big as it is. This is a large knife. It's got a 4-inch blade on it, but the blade is very delicate on these things. Almost feels like, you would not want to pry with this blade. I can feel flex in it right there in the tip. You'll break the tip of that thing. This thing would be a good field surgery knife if you're, having to lay something open pretty good. It's a delicate blade. You pick up this clone thing, you can look at the G10 on here. The clone is on the bottom. And the G10 on the clone is twice as thick as it is on the real knife on the top. It gives this thing a blocky feel. It's also heavier because of this. G10 is not a light material. A lot of people think it is, but it adds substantially to the weight of a knife to put G10 on it. Also, you got to support the G10, so you usually got some kind of backing a lot of times on it. So this is a svelte feeling knife in your hand, and this is not. This is a heavy, chunky thing. You can pull it out, and the blade profiles, the guy who ground the knockoff blade was not an artist in this case. This blade is, let me show you, see if I can get the thickness in here. So the real blade is on the right. And you can see right where my finger is here, this finger, bird finger, is you can see where the real blade on the right is narrowed down considerably from the tang of the blade. It's just a much thinner blade. And then when they did this swedge up at the top, it's very finely done, whereas they just look like they took this on a grinder and just kind of rounded the edge off, so that the blade itself on the knockoff just has, it's not bad, but it's a heavy blade, and they weren't real clean about how they did that swedge at the top. And it definitely affects the way this knife feels in your hand and how delicate the blade feels. The other thing they were pretty poor at, and this is probably a one-off thing with this particular guy who ground this knife, is if you look at the tip here, if I can get a focus, he was not an artist. He knocked the tip off that blade. It shouldn't come, it almost has a sheep's foot kind of tip on it. So he really kind of screwed the tip of the blade up. When I originally got the real one, I thought it was a fake steel, a fake knife, because it's got all these strange little striations in the metal. But I've come to appreciate that that's how Spyderco's VG10 looks a lot of time. Not only that, but some of their other knives too. I've got another video that asks whether this knife originally was a clone or not. I'm getting a lot of glare here today, so I'm not sure you'll be able to appreciate it like that other video. But you can see these strange striations, and that's just kind of how their VG10 comes out. So that, I'd never had a knife that was like that before. And it's not the grind marks, it's this funny forging of the metal, I guess. When they grind it, it leaves these strange marks in it. The other thing that's kind of a giveaway on this particular version of the Police is that these are etched letters on both sides. And on the real Police, they are stamped in there. I mean, they're cut down in there. Probably the biggest giveaway is if you look at these two knives at the pivots. As you can see, this on the left is the real one. This tiny little pivot pin. The hardware is really, you would think by looking at this that, that must be the Chinese one because, look how small and insubstantial that pivot is. And then you look at this thing. But I'll show you in the book. This is a 2012 catalog. And you can see that this Spyderco Police has this little pivot hardware. There's some other things about the hardware, a little bit, is the two clips. Let me close this knife down. They're both pretty sharp. That reminds me of something else I need to point out. This is just an aside, but the clip, the one on the right, is genuine. The clip on the genuine one is kind of, it's also, this is almost a dainty knife for being a police knife. It's big knife, long knife, but it feels thin in your hand. And you can see that the clip is also kind of small. Look at this monstrous clip on the fake. And then another thing they usually sometimes get wrong on the clips is you see here how this thing is pointing skyward. And they don't usually leave any of their clips like that. They usually flatten the tip down so it's not kind of gouging into you. So the profile is much lower on this one. You can see this clip is just a monstrosity on here. This is not an elegantly executed knife in any stretch of the imagination. The form of the knife too it's unusual in that they usually get them identically. If you put a caliper on them, I didn't put a caliper on this, but not only is this thing substantially thicker, the clone is on the bottom, but all these dimensions are bigger. It is just a bigger knife. It's not the same dimensions. And I don't know how much of that you can appreciate. You can really appreciate it around this tip, and especially on this side. Enough so that they even have the location of the hardware is in different locations, really, basically, the way the clip attaches. And you can see, even though this clip is substantially bigger, you look at the G10 that's around on the outside of the clip on the left, which is the real one, and the one on the right is a clone. It's got more G10 around it, and it's a bigger clip. You can see the hole's bigger. It's just a big, monstrous clip. This one is set closer to the tip. You can see how wide the tip are. They did not get these knives perfectly matched, and usually the Chinese are very good at getting the pattern pretty much perfect. This is probably one of the worst knockoffs I've got. Now mechanically the knife is pretty good. It's it feels good, it's tight. If having the blade centered and all that stuff is important to you, all those things are pretty good. It's not hitting any place. It's not a bad knife for what they're asking for it. But it's definitely not, it does not feel refined like the Police does. The other thing that's kind of a giveaway on these back lock knockoffs is that the lock is not very good. In that it locks it, I'm sure, fine. But when you try to disengage it, I'm almost all the way down here. You can see. And I still can't get the blade disengaged. You've got to, especially because they put that Boyd dent in there. You got to get that thing all the way down into the bottom of the lock, right there, for it to disengage. So it feels like you're having a little bit of a hard time. A Spyderco, all of the back locks, you push them down, even with that, they disengage pretty quick. I don't know if there's, if you could say that the Chinese, so let's see how much is, you can see how much of that is still sticking up even after it's disengaged the lock back. So you don't have to push it near as far. I suppose that's a good thing from a usability standpoint. The question is whether the lock is as strong. You know, it probably is. A lot of people, I noticed in another video, have complained and thought that they had a fake. Here's the real one. Because of this, I'm going to show you a little indentation here where the blade doesn't really fit the, you see this little, where the blade comes into the back, there's a little level change there. This is the genuine one. So if you run your thumb across there, there's a little bit of depth in there. And some people said, well, that's a sign that the knife was, you know, it's probably a fake. It's actually not. That's actually a sign that maybe this is a genuine knife, because the real ones have that. If you look here on the fake, it's got maybe a little bit, but it is nowhere near as pronounced. If you run your finger across there, it feels pretty close. So the fake is actually fitted a little better in the back here. The other big giveaway on the Chinese knives is the G10. Pretty much on all the Spyderco knives, their G10 surface is it's smooth, but it's got some teeth to it. So that when you push the pad of the soft part of your thumb into it and push, it should make a squeaking sound where it's really grabbing you and you're having to force your finger, which is to give you purchase on the knife. And so it's a nice texture, but it's got tooth to it. So I'm going to see if you can hear this. I'm pushing pretty good in there. And it should give that squeak. When you do the same thing with a Chinese knife, it does not do that. I'm pushing down hard. Probably leaving my skin in there. It's just, it doesn't have that sharp pattern of tooth to the G10. So you can pretty much pick up most knives. Now, the one exception to that I found is the Spyderco Tenacious Ambitious Resilience series, which all say China on them. They're made in China by Spyderco. And they have the same G10 as this. So they're genuine Spyderco knives that when you run your finger across them and push down, they sound like this, very quiet. And they're all made in China of 8 CR13 MOV steel that the Chinese use. They're basically Chinese Spydercos. They're good knives, but they're better than some of the clones. But you know, I mean, they're good. They're good knives. They're well made. They're just heavy, and they got cheaper G10, and they're just a heavier knife. They're not svelte like this. They're kind of thick and bulky, but they're not bad knives. This knife is worth what I paid for it, but it's still kind of a poorly executed knockoff. You can see the pivot on here, hardware, sticks up like a mushroom. All the pivots on here kind of stick up a little. I mean, all the pins, they're like mushrooms on here. They stick up, even though they're countersunk. Whereas if you look at the Spyderco, here's that same pivot. And it is a very low profile. And then all of these guys here, the hardware on both sides, they're almost flush. So the big thing to look for in this, if you're looking at a military per se, if you think you got a bad one, or if you're looking at a picture, the dead giveaway on most of these pictures are the monstrous pivot hardware, which really, you know, it looks better actually. It looks more substantial. You got a lot beefier pivot set of hardware there. But that's like something you could look in a YouTube or a eBay ad and see right off the bat. And then once you get it in your hand, the first thing I'd do is squeak that G10. And see if it does that. And that tells you it's Spyderco G10. I think I covered all the points I wanted to cover. The knife is a little heavier action. It's also, like I said, it's difficult to get it to disengage. And this is a common theme amongst their Chinese lockback knockoffs. Whereas the Spyderco will always be like all the Enduras and Delicas and all those things. All the lockbacks are kind of like this. You know, they're very simple to get disengaged. So I hope that answers some of your questions on these knives. And we only come up, we came up 19 minutes. For some reason, it's hard for me to get under 20 minutes very far. But I hope this helped you look at some of these knives and determine side by side, clone versus real, and some of the things to look for when you're trying to not get deceived on eBay. Thank you for watching, and feel free to make any comments or ask any questions, and I'll answer them. Thank you.